We're beginning the broadcast today with the March WASDE report. It left U.S. ending stocks for corn, soybeans, and wheat unchanged from last month's report. Internationally, though, corn rose by 1.2 million metric tons and soybeans rose by 340,000 metric tons. Wheat global stocks fell by 3 million metric tons. I spoke with DTN lead analyst Todd Hultman on Wednesday for a closer look at the numbers.
Probably good news is that there really was no surprising shock in the WASDE report for the month of March. All the ending stocks estimates for corn, soybeans, and wheat all stayed the same as what we saw in February. So we're still looking at a very tight supply situation for soybeans and one of the tightest supply situations for corn we've seen in several years. So no big surprises in that report.
And I also want to talk about Brazil's soybean harvest, because I know that WASDE was talking a lot about what's going on internationally, and with the Brazil soybean harvest, only 34% of that harvest complete when it should be over half at this point, and that's not even taking into account any quality issues. Then the safrinha corn planting around 50% complete when it should be about 80%. How serious are these numbers? How much of a delay are we seeing?
Yeah, now first of all, I'll say we did have attention on the crop estimates from USDA for Brazil and Argentina, and Brazil bumped up the soybean harvest 1 million metric tons to 134, and if true, that'll be a new record soybean harvest. I'm counseling everybody, though, to take that in light pencil because, as you say, we've got a very wet situation here in central Brazil. The harvest is late, as you noted. We're probably about 2 to 3 weeks behind the normal schedule. And I think there's a real concern that we may lose some of that soybean production, or I should say Brazil could lose some of that soybean production, maybe 2 or 3 million metric tons worth before this all gets harvested. And then the flip side of this harvest we have to keep in mind is we need to get the soybeans out of the way to get the corn planted. So the corn planting, which is Brazil's bigger second corn crop planting, is also delayed, and that puts them in a little more precarious situation where they could be looking at hot or dry weather later when they're trying to pollinate corn.
And when we talk about U.S. crops, when we talk about South American crops, China always has a role to play in this as well. So where do they stand?
Yes, well, the sales to China have just been off the charts this year. Very strong export numbers for both corn and soybeans, much more than we expected for both of those two. And that continues so far. And so as the export business transitions now from the U.S. to Brazil, with them starting to harvest their big crop, I anticipate China will continue to have a very strong appetite for Brazil's soybeans. I do have to say, though, there is one slight blemish to that outlook, and it reared its head here in Wednesday's markets, and that is that there's growing concerns about African swine fever in China and the impact, the negative impact that may have on their feed demand situation. Among China's prices, we saw corn and soybean meal break support here on Wednesday, and that is a slight bearish concern, and really the first bearish concern we've had in many, many months. Otherwise, it's just been a very bullish outlook for both corn and beans, thanks largely to China's demand.
And with all that focus on harvest, on imports, on exports, here at home, we have that prospective planting survey coming up at the end of the month. So do you think we're going to start to see things shift more to domestic concerns?
Well, I can tell you, Troy, that the basis here in the U.S. is very strong for both corn and soybeans. So all the market clues show domestic demand for both of those running very strong. And of course, supplies are tighter this time around. So we get to that prospective planning report. We've got some of the best prices we've seen in about 7 years. And the incentives are high to get a lot more corn and beans planted this year. And I think the prospective plantings report will probably bear that out. My personal estimate is roughly 92 million acres each for corn and beans. I think is going to be somewhere close to the ballpark. And as we get to actual planting time, weather will often determine which way that goes. But I think there's no question that there's plenty of incentive to get planted this year.
And Todd, we haven't talked since you did DTN's Ag Summit a little over a month ago. Is there anything that you'd like to share from your talk at the summit that could help us with our marketing or risk management decisions ahead of spring?
Yes, well, my advice to folks mainly has been I don't think there's any rush to jump ahead and price new crop corn or soybeans just yet at this point. We see both of those prices in nice uptrends, and I think perhaps they have a little farther to go. Now, having said that, we have to weigh that also with the parts of the country you're in. Of course, if you're in Nebraska, you're concerned about those dry conditions. So whether you have irrigation or not is going to relate to just how eager you might be to forward price some of that cash crop. If you don't have irrigation, it might be more of a risky venture to jump out there too early on pricing that crop.
Yeah, when we were preparing for this interview in that email, you said that risk management advice this year is unusual for you. I didn't know if you wanted to speak on that a little bit.
Yeah, well, it's so rare that we start off the year with such profitable looking price scenarios. And of course, it seems to be well supported by the supply situation and the demand that is showing up from China. So I think this is once where time is on our favor, and we can probably let the market play out a little bit before we start taking advantage of those prices.